Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I decided that because of climate change that I try to fly only once a year. So my wife and I decided to drive up to this conference. So I drove from Florida to Georgia, where we spent the night with her cousin, and I had 2 hours of sleep, and then drove this morning from Georgia over here, and we're parked halfway across campus, and it won't let me add more money. Hopefully I don't get a ticket or I don't get my car towed. And I'm operating on adrenaline right now, so all but 2 hours of sleep. Before I speak in the name of my grandparents, the ancestors, as well as the father of our country, Jean-Jacques Dessalines. It's ironic, dreadlocks. My grandmother wanted me to cut the dreads. Usually I'm prepared, I know it's late afternoon, I'm prepared to bombard you all with high theory, philosophical terms. I'll get to that, but I'm gonna break the ice a little bit with a little story. My first 25 works, published peer-reviewed works, are actually on the black-white academic achievement gap, which I tried to deal with the issue by tackling the issue from the point of view of consciousness, to understand the origins of black consciousness, how African Americans recursively reorganize and reproduce their being in the world, and then from there try to understand the black-white academic achievement gap. So that's an attack on Agbu's cultural ecological model. Then my grandmother died, and I decided, well, my grandfather died, but prior to that, then my grandmother died about 6 months after I was married. And I fell into a deep depression. And I refused. I didn't want to teach. I didn't want to publish. I didn't want to do anything. And then my grandfather visited me in a dream and said I had to get up. And then my grandmother visited me in a dream and said I had to get up. My wife would call me every single day when she went to work to make sure that I didn't do anything stupid, because I was trained as a phenomenologist, philosophy. So my heroes were, quote unquote, Nietzsche, Heidegger, anyway, Camus. I still love Camus though. Anyway, so from that point on, I decided to develop or try to understand the nature of consciousness through Haitian Voodoo. So I wanted to develop a theory of everything. Prior to falling into my deep depression, that's what I was working on. It's called a theory of phenomenological structuralism, and it's published as such in peer-reviewed journals as well as in the forthcoming book. So that takes you back all the way to understanding this division of consciousness between what we call the emergent property of the brain, materialism, and idealism. But the problem that, because I was trained as a phenomenologist, the problem that I was encountering is, in Haitian Voodoo and Haitian metaphysics, which I call Haitian idealism, in the current book published, Haitian Epistemology, and I thank Dr. Desir for citing me. Anyway, published as Haitian Epistemology. The problem that I was having is, in the West, we cannot have contradictions. That's the problem with Western philosophy. Western philosophy tries to resolve contradictions and paradoxes, and that's the way we move forward with knowledge. So for me, I am what you call a metaphysical materialist and an ontological monoist. A metaphysical materialist simply means I believe that everything is material. An ontological monoist simply means that I believe materialism, there's no idealism, it's simply materialism by which everything is constituted. Einstein was a materialist. So that is in line with contemporary, what we call general theory of relativity. However, quantum theory goes against materialism to some extent, because quantum theory suggests that what is fundamental to the universe is either information or consciousness itself. There's a couple of experiments called the double slit experiment. We also have what's called entanglement. Einstein did not believe in entanglement. He called that spooky action at a distance, because for Einstein, everything was empirical and material. So this is the issue that I had to resolve, and how I chose to resolve this issue is to deal with it via Haitian epistemology, Haitian consciousness. What is Haitian is Haitian epistemology an idealist or a materialist philosophy? And what I argue, or epistemology, and in the epistemology, what I argue is that there are four fundamental philosophical principles in Haitian epistemology, what I call a hermeneutical phenomenology, which patterns Heidegger's phenomenology, an anti-dialectic. I know a lot of people want to say that is dialectical. The constitution of Haitian consciousness is dialectical. I disagree. For me, it's an anti-dialectical metaphysics within ontology, within Haitian epistemology. And then the other one is the ethical principle, which is a reciprocal justice, a form of reciprocal justice. So as where we find in Kantian ontology, what we call deontological ethics, in Haitian epistemology, I argue we find a form of reciprocal justice. And from there, what constitutes, so we have a hermeneutical phenomenology, a normative ethic of reciprocal justice, an anti-dialectical perspective to historical praxis. Whereas in German philosophy, we find a dialectical perspective to the historical process, what Hegel calls the dialectical perspective. I disagree with that. For me, in Haitian epistemology, we have an anti-dialectical, because the relationship is not between social formations in Haitian epistemology as I see it. The relationship is between the parallel world of Villocant and the world of phenomena. So what I attempt to do to understand or come up with a theory of everything to understand consciousness, I had to start with Haitian epistemology, because I could not bridge idealism and materialism. So in attempting to bridge the two, idealism and materialism, I was stuck. I was stuck in quantum physics, which says that ideas are fundamental, information is fundamental. And then I was stuck with the Cartesian understanding that there's a split between materialism and idealism. Then I am stuck between Daniel Dennett, who argues that consciousness is an illusion. It doesn't really exist. So how do I resolve this issue? So for me, I had to resolve this issue, I had to reach out to what does Haitian epistemology says about consciousness. And as I see it, consciousness is a materialism. I know some people argue it's spiritual. For me, it's material, but as well as spiritual. It's material in this sense. If you look at what we say about the body, our num is tibonange, gobanange, and call. All of those things are material energy. Remember, when in zombification in Haitian voodoo, they remove your gobanange to make you whatever violation you committed, to basically neuter you. So what I argue is that Haitian epistemology is actually a materialist philosophy. But then how do I bridge that with contemporary evidence in quote-unquote modern science, modern physics? And to do that, I reached out in physics to a theory called orchestrated objective reduction theory, which is by Stuart Hameroff and Penrose. And what they argue is that, and I'm not going to get into the details of the theory because I know it's late. But anyway, consciousness is spiritual, but it's an emergent. We have to look at it as a fifth force of nature, along with the strong and weak nuclear forces, gravity, and electromagnetism. So we have to view consciousness as a fifth force of nature. And how does consciousness then become embodied as materialism? And what I argue is that it becomes embodied through what they call the microtubules of the brain. Consciousness becomes embodied. So in doing so, then we could start to understand, because what I'm attempting to do with Haitian epistemology is what Schopenhauer did with Hinduism. Schopenhauer takes Hinduism to develop what he calls the noumenal self. Because Immanuel Kant argues that we can never know noumena. All we can experience is phenomena, and that the brain structures reality, etc., blah, blah, blah. So what I argue is we can both know, in Haitian epistemology says we can know both phenomena and noumena. And how is that possible? Because Kant eliminates what we in Haitian epistemology maintain. Kant eliminates mediums, psychics, extrasensory perceptions, a sixth sense, whatever. Kant eliminates all of that as part of the categories of understanding. Kant has whereas Descartes comes up with the rational I, Kant has a concept called the transcendental subject of apperception. It's tantamount to Daniel Dennett's illusion metaphor, that consciousness is an illusion. This transcendental subject of apperception is how we experience the world as individuals. Haitian epistemology says we experience the world through our what? Numb, which is a material thing. Same thing as Kant. As we saw earlier, the consciousness of the individual through what Kant calls the categories of apperception has access to the noumenal world. And this is how we, in turn, when in Haitian Vodou, they say, your grandmother has a dream and says, don't go out tonight. Kant eliminates that. Kant says that's impossible because you can never know what's ahead, what's going to happen. You can never know noumena. That's impossible. But Haitian Vodou says, no, that is possible. Because we have access to the noumenal world, the world of Vilcon, the world that we're trying to establish balance and harmony between. We have access to that. How do we have access? And what I argue is that I add one more category to Kant's two categories. Immanuel Kant has two categories of how the mind structures reality. I add the third, what Haitians say the third, which is extrasensory perception, psychic mediums, etc. Modern science is starting to do that. We call it, in contemporary physics and contemporary modern science, epistemology of science, we call this post-materialism. I don't subscribe to post-materialism completely, but I do accept the understanding that extrasensory perceptions, mediums can have access to the world, because I subscribe to what's called the multiverse theory by Herbert Everett. I do subscribe to that philosophy. So therefore, what I conclude is that, in my conclusion, Haitian epistemology is both a transcendental realist and a transcendental idealist philosophy. It is transcendentally ideal because our consciousness can access the transcendental, real, noumenal world by which we ought to organize and recursively reproduce our being in the world. So that's why it is both transcendental ideal and transcendentally real. Europeans can't accept that because it appears contradictory, but it's not. So even our aesthetics is transcendentally ideal and transcendentally real. And I'm going to end with this. How is beauty? Beauty and goodness in Haitian epistemology are interconnected. So how is beauty both transcendentally ideal and transcendentally real? Transcendentally ideal because it is subjected to the subjective individual through their categories of experience, how we structure reality, how each one of us transcendently structure and experience reality. How is it transcendentally real? Where do we get the conceptions of beauty from, the conceptions of art from, and Haitian Vodou from the noumenal world? And then it's a dialectical process too now, because I can become a loi, or let's use the case of Dessalines. Dessalines becomes a loi after his death. Why? Because he becomes the embodiment of a political warrior, right? So not only can us being in the material or in the phenomenal world allows us to perfect our experiences, but also, the numinal world gives us ideas by which we recursively reorganize ourselves. Our concept of beauty, our concept of love, our concept of political warrior, all of those allegedly come from 401 lois, bon Dieu and 400 lois, correct? And to access those, we have to have access to the world of the numinal world, what I call the numinal world in my work. So for me, it is both transcendentally, aesthetics is both transcendentally ideal because it is subject to the individual and their consciousness, and it is transcendentally real because the numinal world in Haitian Vodou is real. The concepts are real, by which we ought to organize our existence. And I will end on that. Thank you.